On today's episode, we'll be talking about the importance of reviewing and pruning your client roster as your agency grows. We'll talk about what factors should be considered and why it's important to be proactive in managing your roster of clients.
All right, Luke. So it's hard enough to get new clients and to build a client roster, but today we're talking about getting rid of clients. So,
Yeah.
before we dive in, why is it important to even think about, you know, trimming, slimming down, or pruning your client list? Like, what's the why should people, agency, leaders even think about this?
Especially as your agency, continues to grow, you may have taken on clients in the past that may not be the best fit for the company now and in the current iteration for a variety of factors. And we'll definitely go into more details. But I think it's just good to assess your client base from on a regular basis. Just because they are the people that are paying you now and are supporting your business doesn't mean that they're the right fit for the next phase of your growth of the business.
Yeah. What's funny is if you think about the very word pruning, when I think about that word, I think about trees, and you know how you cut off like the less healthy or like the dead branches, and that allows the tree to kind of grow more healthily upward. And so, I think it's a similar kind of analogy for agencies. In order for agencies to thrive in the long run, you have to kind of make some cuts. And so, yeah, with that, maybe we should dive into some of the factors about that kind of go into making these types of decisions. So yeah, let's kick it off. Maybe the first one, we could start with kind of high level. Like, is this client, if you're looking at your client roster, are they a good strategic fit? So what do you think that means? And, what should people think about when they determine this as a criteria?
Part of this is first understanding what is your kind of core ICP, ideal client profile for your business. If it's specific to an industry, size of client, or even if you're in like a technology or platform specialty, like is this client, does that align with that vision for the business? And your ICP may have evolved over time. So from the current state and where you're trying to go, is that a good fit for your overall, roster of clients?
Yeah, I think one good measure on this end is there's the way that you're marketing outwardly to attract new clients. And, that might be a very focused positioning to a certain size or appealing to a certain specialty that you offer or a certain vertical that you play in. And how different is that from the client that's on your roster? And I think if there's a huge gap, so, let's say you're more mid-market enterprise level, but then you have some SMB clients, ones that are in totally different industries than you serve, that you're trying to serve. Then I think that's a good kind of marker and a starting point for realizing the client might not be a good strategic fit.
Yeah. And we kind of went through that evolution with our agency Barrel as it went kind of deeper into the commerce, the Shopify as a platform. And, over the years, we were making websites for a variety of different clients on a variety of different tech platforms. And at a certain point, what ended up happening was, the team also got fragmented internally, where some people were more, WordPress was a big focus, and they had a lot of WordPress expertise. And then like some people had more of a Shopify expertise, and then some people are kind of blending between the two. So even how we did projects from an internal process wise was getting a little bit, muddy on, what's the best way to kind of handle a project from a process standpoint, but also from a training standpoint, it got very confusing to manage.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, let's move on to the next factor that we should think about, which is gross margin. So, you could just, think of this as profitability. Are the clients profitable, after all the delivery hours and the costs, or like, are the engagements you're doing with them generally profitable? Is the whole relationship over the course of the year profitable? So yeah, this is something I think we should definitely take into consideration when thinking about whether a client is someone to keep or not, right?
Yeah, I think profitability is, sometimes you might look at the revenue and say, wow, this client is paying us X dollars a year, X dollars a month. Like it's hard to lose that revenue, right? But then if you're not making money on it, it actually might be healthier for you not to have that revenue at all. And or just really, think about what is it about either the client or how we're delivering it, the work, or how we're structuring the team that makes it not profitable. It's not, cut and dry saying if it's not profitable, we should cut them. It's just assessing and just knowing, having that data to make that decision.
Yeah, this is a really tough one because you can argue some clients that get really big, over time the profitability might be thin, but in some respects they are paying in absolute dollars, the amounts that are allowing you to make payroll and keep certain people on staff, and so that can actually really get I think ossified so that like you kind of feel like, hey, like this is the way it is, and we really can't lose this because that would mean people losing jobs. And so it makes it really hard to move away from such clients. And in fact, like I think, we've been in this position where you feel like, hey, you have no choice. You just keep riding that relationship until the client, lets the agency go. But I do think there's a case to be made if you're really bold and you want to, be proactive. You can look at the gross margins and make that decision of, hey, in order for us to build something profitable in the long run, we might have to forego some of these relationships in order to then make room for the more profitable clients.
Yeah, definitely. And some of this could be just taking a look internally and seeing, is this from over servicing where you're
Right.
losing margin because let's say you had this relationship for a really long time and whenever the client asks for something, you want to go and give them that, something extra. But, it may not be the client that's a poor fit. It could just be, how we're handling the relationship and the delivery on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, great. Let's move on to the other piece, which is more about the potential of a client relationship. So, one of the things that we always talk about with our agencies is, hey, like, what's the account expansion potential? You win a client, you get that first engagement, but, what are ways to deepen that relationship, deliver more value and increase that amount that you might, be able to make from servicing them? Yeah, like how should agencies think about this when it comes to evaluating the client roster and think about who to keep and who to let go?
Yeah, I think a lot of this comes down to your business model and what your relationships ideally look like. In some businesses, it's very much project to project, where you do a very fixed, defined scope of work. You move on, and like the client doesn't really need your services beyond the initial project. So if you look at it from an expansion potential, probably not a lot of expansion from each specific client. But on the other hand, if it's very much an account-driven, long-term retainer type of relationship, you should be looking at thinking, how can we either increase the retention and longevity of this client, or how do we incrementally, add on a new service offering, increase the scope of what we're doing for them, so that over the long term, that the value of that relationship continues to grow.
Yeah. So for those, when you look through that list of clients and you find ones that clearly feel like dead ends, and
Yeah.
you are in an agency that really wants to grow these accounts, how should they think about it?
Yeah, I think it comes down to the amount of resources you're putting behind an account. So typically, I would say in a company structure where you have these ongoing relationships, you might have account managers dedicated to working on, maintaining a roster of clients. And is their time better spent on the clients that are, have more potential for growth? So it almost comes down to a allocation of time and opportunity cost type of equation on where you should put your time. Yeah, internally.
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
mean, I feel like in the like some of these clients, I think you can be upfront with them on just, hey, what is the nature of our relationship going to be? Because, the client might come. I mean, we've seen this many times, right? Client comes, hey, I have this big redesign project, but afterwards, our team's going to handle everything internally and we're going to, we're not going to need you guys. And that's fine. And I think that clarity helps the agency plan for, how much to invest post launch of the initial project.
Yeah, and in some instances, having a steady amount of a retainer, for example, that doesn't necessarily grow, but it's consistent and keeps going, that's still valuable. So just because it's not growing isn't a reason to just, prune a client.
Yeah, no, that's right. So the
Yeah.
context really matters, and so does the business model. Let's talk a little bit about relationship quality as another factor. And by this, it's almost like who do you have access to on the client side? Decision makers, like which level of leadership, all that, and like what's the depth of that relationship? How much does that factor into whether you keep a client or not? And yeah, like should this really be a driving factor?
Where that comes into play is, let's say you're working with, a director level role at the company, where it's director of ecom, director of marketing, but then there might be a C-suite that ultimately is the decision maker at the company. In some instances, you don't necessarily, your day-to-day interaction is with, the people that are working on your accounts and your projects. But I would say a factor that comes in when there's a lot of turnover on the client end. And then you have to, if you don't have another decision maker or stakeholder at the company that can kind of support you or be your advocate, you're essentially trying to re-pitch the work every single time to the next person that comes in. So I would say that there could be a lot of time and energy lost in those efforts where, and I wouldn't say this is the reason to prune a client, but more a effort to think about how do you go more, upstream to the true decision maker at a company and build that relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think just, on this front, where you really want to make, any drastic changes is if, the relationship quality has deteriorated because of, bad behavior or, maybe unacceptable behavior from, a stakeholder, on the client side, so it might be, the way they're communicating to a team or the way that, they're just not following up on their kind of commitments, or just there's some degree of politics or just kind of things the way they operate that just kind of might be at odds with the values and the ethics of the agency. And so in that case, yeah, relationship quality could be a factor, and it's just a call you have to make on like, hey, we care more about keeping our sanity and maybe not having to deal with this type of person, and then just making that hard decision. But those are rare, and so it's worth always obviously surfacing and kind of discussing it and making it a point. But yeah, it's one of those things where I think yeah, there's gradations of it.
I would say, yeah, the test of your relationship quality is if you have feedback around things like that, do they kind of trust and take the feedback and have a conversation about changing behavior or yeah, any kind of concerns on that end.
Yeah, absolutely. The next one is something that, maybe is a huge factor. We're calling it payment behavior. So do they pay on time without, discounts or friction or anything else that might slow it down? So, I mean, obviously you're very much, you have a view into how our agencies handle payments. So yeah, what is your thoughts on how payments should determine whether you keep a client or not?
Yeah, we've made this mistake many times in the past, but oftentimes at a company, the person you're working with is different than the person that's paying your invoices. Usually, when you see kind of repeated overdue invoices or invoices stacking up, or even kind of pushback on invoice amounts, those are, I'll call, yeah, red flags. So in the worst case of scenarios that we've seen in the past is client stacked up months of overdue invoices. We're still working with them day to day, so we thought there's a good relationship and there's a lot of work to be done. At a certain point, they just refused or were refused or were unable to pay months of invoices that we just had to write off. So all the, like let's call it like 6 months of time that we're working with a client, we're paying our team, paying our expenses, but we never collected on the the invoices for that. So now, we give clients a little bit of leeway, but if anything goes beyond like a few weeks, a month of being overdue without any communication about it or kind of specific reason, what we advise is to pause work or escalate it so that there could be some action taken there.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, this is yeah. Like I think we've talked about so many times. Agencies are not banks. We're not here to lend unlimited credit to our clients. And I also think yeah, this is a good way to be thoughtful about how you engage clients from the start on payment terms, and just their just get a gauge for their ability to pay. And you can go even further, right? You could do credit checks on clients, especially ones that you might not have a proven history, so you can kind of do some reference checks on that. But I think yeah, like this could be fatal. Like if you don't, make the right decisions around this, like it could be fatal to an agency where, you could be working with somebody for, a whole quarter, couple quarters, and then before you know it, you fronted all the costs in that period, only to not get paid on it. That's, that can wipe out a business. And so, yeah, this is something I think, honestly, like, there's escalation paths, right? Like after a client doesn't pay, they get their warning, and then they finally make good on the payment. I think sometimes we might change the way we do payments, where we might not even do work until we're paid in advance. I mean, can you recall, situations like that?
Yeah, definitely. If there's like a repeated, you know, history of late payments, definitely we've kind of switched and said, all right, for this next engagement, let's get paid up front for the amounts before we move forward. And then some clients are amenable to that. Others are, say, all right, it's not a good fit, and let's, part ways. But yeah, I would say the other thing we kind of touch upon is if every um, invoice, it has some kind of friction where they're questioning the amounts, questioning, it could be if it's an hourly engagement, there might be questioning the amount of time spent on an engagement. So if every single invoice or opportunity where they have to pay comes with some tension or friction, it might be a sign that it may not be the right fit.
Yeah, yeah, no, I mean, and
Yeah,
it's really um to the degree, like, what is your tolerance for that kind of pain, I guess, because some clients are going to have really aggressive procurement departments that are going to want to audit all your timesheets and kind of go really into the nitty gritty of, hey, are we paying the right amount? So you're going to get that, and maybe you just accept that as the cost of doing business, and you staff up on your side so that you have a way to manage through that. But then, yeah, you might have other clients who, just for whatever reason, question the value of the work, even though they've agreed to it up front. And, that could be just a mismatch of, like collaboration. And it just, it could just be that, you're not a good fit for what what they need. And so, yeah, you could selectively, take yourself out of that situation.
yeah, definitely, and yeah, and there's some part of looking inward to say, you know, is this a gap in our project management or account management where it should have been clearer so that by the time the invoice came around, it should never be a question on like the amount that should be paid.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I
Yeah.
think that's generally, something, and we'll talk about it in the next factor. But yeah, like I think, before being too quick to blame the client and go, hey, like, they wronged us, or, it's their fault. I think there's always an opportunity to yeah, take a look at your own behaviors and processes and see what could we do better.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So
Yeah.
the next one is operational load, we're calling it. So it's just a factor about, just with clients, maybe there are clients where for whatever reason there's more fire drills than other clients. There's just more types of, reactive change requests, maybe just last minute stuff. There's a degree of extra hand holding that's required, a lot of repetition of, instructions or information that needs to be provided. That is very taxing on an agency. How should agencies think about clients? A lot of them term this if you have a difficult client, how should they think about whether or not to keep such clients?
Yeah, I think this is a big one that the team feels the most, where so they'll call them difficult clients, but oftentimes everything is an emergency, everything is urgent, everything needs to get done ASAP. Even this could be like the tone of feedback or how people talk to the team. That this could all kind of factor into the mental, I'll call it like the mental load of a client. And like the ultimate impact is, your team could feel burnt out by them. It can cause turnover. You can lose valuable team members, and ultimately, so like yeah, the real impacts from these types of relationships. And I think honestly starts with the conversation, sharing the feedback with the client, say, hey, this is what, this is the perception. What can we do to help improve whatever the factor is, whether it's, we need longer turnaround times. We need to kind of prioritize what truly is urgent and a fire versus what, can wait a day or two. And then starting there and seeing what the kind of the reaction is and see if the process can improve from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about this a lot. Like there's of course things that the agency can do, as much as possible to you know, uh, make it smoother, even with more challenging, let's say more like high touch clients, let's say. But I do think there is a line at which, you have to figure out, hey, is this worth it? Like, for the long term kind of sanity of the team members to continue working with such a client, and at what value, would you kind of, or at what price would you kind of step away from this? Yeah, I do think being decisive in this manner actually. You can say the upside of it. If you're decisive and you go, hey, this client is causing too many headaches. They just don't have their stuff together. We've recommended that they get a project manager or some kind of coordinator on their side, but they haven't. So we're dealing with like 4 different stakeholders, and it's just a mess all the time, contradicting, instructions, etc. I think for an agency leader to be proactive and to make the call of like, hey, I think we're gonna end this relationship. It does go a long way with the team, because like you are taking a chance, you're going to take a financial hit from such a decision, but at the same time, it signals to the team, hey, we're here to, make sure you guys are respected, our processes are respected, and, we're going to, stick to our guns when it comes to, serving clients the way we know how.
Yeah, definitely. And I think probably touch upon this later, but this is the job of the agency leader. You can't let the team make these decisions and like be the ones who tell the client, "Hey, we're not a good fit. Let's move on." And yeah, to your point, it's yeah, it is yeah. If you don't make the decision, then it could cause burnout, turnover, and then if you do make a quick decision, you can build a lot of trust
Yeah.
with the team that you're looking after them. Yeah.
No, no, that is such a good one because like
Yeah.
you're forced if you force those decisions downward, like yeah, the team member who's on the project is going to be faced with their own decision of, hey, do I tell off the client or do I just quit? Basically, like you're forcing it to make that decision. So no, that's an excellent point. Okay, let's move on to the next one, which is I think we call this like case study value, kind of like marketing value. When you're looking at your client roster, and I guess this is, sort of related to the strategic fit, like positioning side of things. But when you think about clients on your client roster, do they add brand credibility? Is the work that we're doing with them lead to a showcaseable case study, something that we can market and use to get more such clients? I guess it's kind of that, is there, we talk about this a lot, like, hey, is that new logo a good one that's going to bring in more such clients? So, how much of a factor should this be? Like, just because a client has low case study value, like, does that make him less appealing? I mean, this is something, yeah, something to think about.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a probably more straightforward call when deciding to take on a client, saying, "All right, here's the reason." They have a lot of they can bring a lot of value to our case studies, and when we go to pitch more work, it's a really good brand that we can kind of reference. But I don't think it's every single client needs to be that, right? It's for a variety of reasons. It could be an emerging brand that is aspiring to be that brand, but maybe your job is to help them get there, so they're not going to be that yet. Or there can just be a lesser known player in this space that if they're a great client, you know for all the other points that we just talked about, and they're consistent, they value the work, you add a lot of impact to their business. I wouldn't say it's a reason that you should, yeah, prune that client just because they're not like a great, brand or visible brand.
Yeah, absolutely.
Uh,
It's interesting. I mean, I think about Apple a lot because we've had peers, other agency owners who've worked with Apple, but like I think they're pretty notorious for not letting you ever talk about the work they do, that that agencies do
yeah,
with them, and so it's always interesting because like, well, do you say no then because of that? Most likely not, because the if the project is lucrative enough and the the type of work is interesting, that's probably a more overwhelming factor. I think you're always going to have a mix, I think, of clients that are going to have high case study value, but then others that, not so much for whatever reason, you can't talk about them, or they just, it's not kind of a good fit for storytelling.
yeah. No, we've had our handful of clients where we've done a lot of work, great work, and they just, as part of the contract for whatever reason, we just couldn't share it, but still really good experience for the team. And, through like other, we can share the work through, private means on, what our impact for those businesses.
Yep. Let's round this out by just talking about some other factors, mainly around risk. I think when you're looking at a client roster and potentially looking to prune, how much does something like client revenue concentration matter? Like, should that be taken into account for why you should prune a client?
Yeah, I think, yeah, let's say one big client takes up significant portion of your revenue. Let's say like half of your revenue is one client. In some ways, it's how do you increase all the other accounts to so that that percentage drops down as a relative number. But yeah, I wouldn't say it's a. I mean, it's definitely a risk for the business because a lot of your, percentage of your revenue is, tied up with that one client. But I wouldn't say that's necessarily a reason why you should prune a client or even scale it back to decrease a percentage.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think you
Yeah,
should take that
yeah,
relationship as far as it can go, and then just grow the
yeah,
other relationships to make sure the concentration gets watered down. Any
yeah,
other risks, like maybe legal headaches of any sort that might come with an existing client, or maybe reputational issues that could come. We've heard of kind of clients with founders that might have gotten into some scandal or trouble. At that point, is it best to kind of resign from that account?
yeah. I mean, those are tricky things that you just have to think about with your leadership team, your like company values, and whether or not like is this a kind of a PR thing where whatever the scandal is kind of overblown, and you have like insight into actually what happened, and something may kind of blow over in a short period of time, or is this a fundamental issue where your team members are unhappy about it, they don't want to work on the account, and you're overarching, like there is a reason to kind of part ways from a client. I think that's definitely, I think reputation is something, yeah, it's very important to consider. Um, and then, yeah, from a legal perspective, if there's additional risk that you're taking on for working with a client, yeah, it really depends on like the type of work that you're doing. But yeah, like, if like you have unlimited like IP risk on a project. So if a client gets sued and any of the work that you did, you're you know, you know indemnifying them like to, unlimited level. I mean, those are risks that you probably agree to when taking
Yeah,
on a project or an
yeah.
account. So it's best to try to cap that even before it starts.
No, 100%. You know what comes to
Yeah,
mind is like sometimes the the BD team might oversell an agency's capabilities and do a good job in landing a client, only to
yeah,
find that, hey, this you know this project is just we're or yeah, it's just too much for us to handle ourselves, or just we just don't have the capability or the confidence to deliver something that works. At that
yeah,
point, I mean, I think there's a couple avenues. You can maybe bring in somebody to support as a subcontractor that has the experience and has the capability, but there's also that kind of more nuclear option, which is to go to the client and be like, hey, we actually can't do it, we're gonna have to take ourselves out, which not the greatest from a reputational standpoint, but then, there are instances where it could actually save you in the long run, because then you're not part of, a failed kind of a blow up project or something that, detrimentally impacts the client.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, it's sometimes better to bow out and then take the hit immediately versus a much bigger problem down the road. And in that you decide to return money, you can decide to, you know, just pause, come to some kind of natural pause, and also find and recommend another partner that could be a better fit in situations like that.
Awesome. Well, so yeah, those are a bunch of factors, that should be taken into account when thinking about, pruning the client roster. Of course, we're all trying to grow our client rosters and make them healthy, but at the end of the day, you got to make some tough decisions if you're, going to grow right. So yeah, good stuff, and thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time.